In the next couple of videos, we're going to look at a relatively recent idea in programming called unit testing. Now, unit testing is available in all of the major programming languages, at least the ones I'm familiar with. So here's what unit testing works, or how it works, and what the concept is. If you're going to write a fairly large program, it's going to involve a lot of different procedures and functions to do tasks for you, and all of those have to work together to ultimately create some larger task. So when you've written programs, you've written programs to check to see if somebody's social security number is valid, and then you've had procedures to create menus and input employee information, and you put all that stuff together to create one large program. On a unit level, what we want to do is to test that each of the individual components of the larger program work, and that's what unit testing does. But unit testing is also a different point of view in terms of writing programs. It's a point of view where you lay out the specifications for code, so you know that you want to write a function that accomplishes a certain task, and you lay out what the inputs are going to look like and what the outputs should be in terms of what kind of data structures. But not only that, you then define a specific set of inputs and what the outputs should be for that specific set of inputs. So we're going to look at a few simple examples here, and this first example shows you kind of the basic way that you can implement unit testing. The function we're testing here is pretty simple, so you might not think to do a unit test on it, but it does hopefully give the idea. Alright, so we have to import unit test, so that's a module in Python that's already created, and we're going to test a simple function that just adds 1 to whatever value you plug in. So we should be putting numbers in there, but we're not going to check for that. We're just going to add 1 to whatever comes our way in terms of the parameter x. Okay, so to do the unit testing, you have to create a class. You can call this class anything you want. I've called this one my test, but you could give this any name you want. Whatever you call this class, it does have to be a child of unittest.testCase. So this is this is a class in the unit test module. And then inside of this class, you can create methods, and these methods will be performing tests on this function. Now, the name of the methods can be anything you want as long as they start with the word test. So I could call this test A if I wanted to, or anything like that, but it has to start with test. Alright, and then as a method, it always gets self. Self in this case is going to be a unit test. Alright, so what I want to do is check that if I plug 3 into this function, the output should be 4. So the way to do this in the unit testing, at least in Python, is to assert that if I plug 3 into 4, that's going to give me an output, and that output should be equal to the number 4. So I'm asserting that this thing and before the comma is equal to this thing after the comma. Assert equal. Alright, we can run this and see what's going to happen. Now this is going to do some work for us here. It's going to take the parameter 3, pass it to fun, compute an output, and then compare that output to 4. And let's see what happens when we run this. Well, I ran the wrong thing, so let's see. The output comes from the actual assert equal, which goes and checks and says, yep, everything worked out just fine. It gives you a start time and then gives you an exit code 0 and says everything worked great, no problems. So if you add 1 to 3, you do indeed get 4. What happens if I put 5 here and run this again? Well, now we get an error. And the error is that this assertion that 4 is equal to 5 is not true. So this gives you a way, you could think of this, if you were running a code shop where you had a bunch of people writing code for you, as maybe a lead programmer, you could write down a set of specifications, you could write out unit tests that code had to pass, and then when your programmers submit their code to you, the first thing you would do is run them through a unit test. You can actually automate this in GitHub. So you could have this all set up in GitHub. We're not going to do that. Well, we might. Get this all set up in GitHub, have the unit tests in GitHub so that when somebody submits their code, they're automatically run through the unit tests. And if they fail, well, you get a report back. All right, let's look at another example. In previous videos, we had looked at some date algorithms that I had found on the internet. There's two versions of the date algorithms. There's one that takes a number of days from some predefined date well in the past and then gives you back a date, a day, a month, and a year. So we've looked at this code before. I'm not going to go through it again. And then there's another algorithm, numDays, where you give it a day, a month, and a year, and it computes the number of days since that date in the past. And when we reviewed this in a previous video, I said I'd pull it off the internet. I wasn't really sure how well it worked. It worked well enough for what I was doing that I was happy with it, but now we can go back and perhaps give it a little bit more thorough testing if we want. Oh, look at that. I spelled algorithms wrong. Don't pay attention to that. We are going to do some unit testing on those two date methods. Actually, they're not inside of a class at this point, so they're not really methods. They're just functions. Anyways, import unit test. We are going to import this module, datealgorithms.py, and we're importing everything. So we're not going to have to say date algorithms dot whatever. We can just use the two functions back here, date and numDays. If we had said import date algorithms, then we'd have to say date algorithms dot date, date algorithms dot numDays. But since we've done it this way, we don't. All right. So we have a class. As I said, you can name this anything you want. So I've called it test dates, and it is a child of unit test.testCase. And we are going to then check a bunch of dates. And I also have, in this case down here, this is an old trick that we had discussed in a previous video, but I will point out what it does. So when you run this program has a name, and if it's known as the main program, we're going to run unittest.main. So unittest.main is a method in that module which you've imported, and unittest.main is going to go through and look for children of unittest.testCase, and it's going to go through here and look at the methods in here, and it's going to look at methods that begin with the word test. So test date and test days, and it will run those methods and report any errors. Okay, so I am asserting that this date should be equal to 4/3/2017. Oh, and I didn't get rid of all my peps, so it's yapping at me. Now, here's some things that I had not tried out in a previous video. So this is just numbers that came off from the previous video when I used these dates. But if I add 365 days to this, and we're not in a leap year, I should get 1 year later. And if I add 2 years, then I should get 2 years later. Excuse me, 3 years. I should get 3 years later, but now we're in a leap year, so we've lost a day. So this is not going to be the 4th day of the month. This is going to be the 3rd day of the month. And let's see, we can also go backwards in time. So I'm trying to test the range of values for these algorithms I got and see what kind of range they have. And if I go back 101 days, I'm sorry, 101 years, so 101 times 365, that's 101 years. There's 25 leap years in that time period, so I'm going to subtract off that number of days, and that should put me back to 1916 on the same date, 4/3, the 4th of March. And if I go back 101 years, take in the leap days and then add 35 days to that, then we should end up on the 8th day of the 4th month. So those should all be equal. And then this is just to illustrate the fact that you can also test other methods or functions in the same test class. So these are all testing date. And now I'm going to test numDays. I'm only going to do one test on numDays because really, again, we're just pointing out the fact that you can run more than one test in the same class. So this method runs test days, and I'm just checking that the numDays of the 4th day in March of 2017 is the same as the number of days from the third day in March of 2017 plus 1. And here, let's do this. We can print if we want to. Test date. And we'll print test days. Make the underscore to be consistent with what I did before. And now let's run this. I should be getting something that said, oh, okay, that's the one I wanted. Okay, so all of those pass. So apparently that date method on Wiki isn't too bad. I don't know how far and how accurate this thing goes back, but seems to work pretty good, at least in and around this time frame. Okay, now these all are based on the same kind of test, that you have two things that are equal. It turns out that there are other kinds of tests that you can do, and this is not going to be a comprehensive video on all the kinds of tests that you can do. I think when you see some samples, you'll start to get the idea, but here are some other assertions that you can make. And this is a very basic kind of test. Again, we import unit test. We have a simple function here that returns, this is going to return a true or a false. So this is the simplest way to record or check to see if two values are equal to each other. If x is equal to y, then the value of this will be true and this will return true. And if they're not equal, then the value of this will be false and it will return false. And then we're going to test that. So here's that same trick again. When we run this, the name of the program this will be named main, and it will call unit test.main, which will then look for children of unit test.testcase. And then we'll go into this class and look for methods that begin with test. Now, look at the different kinds of assertions that we can make here. You can also assert false, you can assert true, and you can assert greater, and there's a whole list of different kinds of tests that one might do if you wanted to. You can Google that if you want. This is, again, not going to be a comprehensive video. It would be quite a long video if it was going to be comprehensive. Okay, so assert false that 4 and 2 are equal to each other. So this should come out to be true. 4 and 2 are not equal, so assert false. Assert true that 3 is equal to 3. 3 is equal to 3. That should be true, so that should pass. And then assert greater that, oh, sorry, I didn't want this in here. Assert greater that 4 is greater than 2. So the thing on the left should be greater than the thing on the right. Notice that I'm not calling equals here. So you can just call these asserts with values in here if you want. You can put anything in here that you want. You can put in just numbers like this, or you could put in the output of some function. So pretty flexible. And then we will run this, and everything works out fine. Now we could ask, is it true that 2 is not equal to 2? And again, that should give us an error. And there it says true is not false. So 2 equals 2 returns true, and that is not false, so that assertion breaks down. Alright, so again, unit testing. Here are some basics for unit testing, and the big part of unit testing is that it gives you a new way of thinking about writing code, where you design the code, you think about what kind of values your procedures and functions should have, and you specify those values ahead of time, and specify the unit testing first, and then you write the code to fit the unit tests.